And we are going to be, there is going to be a recording of the meeting being posted on Channel 17. So once that starts, let's make sure everyone knows. And if you don't want to be seen, you can mute your video and still participate. But when we'll let you know when we start. So, Want to start? So I believe Representative Cina Colburn is going to start us off.
Sure. So we've been typically in these conversations, we've been just giving a little bit of general and or committee updates from our work in the legislature at the start, and then just opening things up to questions and conversation. And we usually try to wrap up by 6. Representative Gonzalez has been joining us, and she ended up having a conflict tonight, so she wasn't able to be with us, and sends her regards. So I thought I would give some general updates just on how our legislative work is proceeding, and tell you a little bit what we're hearing about unemployment insurance benefits at the state and federal level, with the recognition that there's a lot of frustration there, and a lot that's not working well. And then I can share a very small amount of updates from my committee. So the legislature, we've been working and meeting remotely. In the Senate, where there's only 30 people, they're able to actually vote and move things forward just using Zoom, a platform like this. And so they took their first remote vote and sent some bills our way. In the House, it's a little bit more complicated because there's 150 of us. And so I think we have felt like this would be an unwieldy platform. So we have a secure voting app that we'll use to complement our House sessions. So our House sessions and debate and bill presentations will take place, and roll call votes will take place using Zoom, but we're also using a more secure app to record votes that is part of, it's called Everbridge, and it's something the emergency management team uses. So to make sure that goes smoothly, we've been doing trainings, practice vote trainings in sort of medium-sized groups this week after doing some initial training over the previous weeks. And so I believe that what's going to happen is that as soon as next week, we're going to ratify our ability to vote remotely. So when we passed that in the House, we had to essentially say that the first vote we would take would be a ratification vote around our ability to vote remotely. That would, can people hear me? Am I freezing up? I see Barbara moving.
You sound good. Every once in a while it freezes, but
okay. Been having a little bit of connectivity issues today. And
you have your email open in the background too, because we keep hearing a ringing.
I will shut it down. I'm not sure if that's me, but I do have my email open in the background. So, so the House Rules Committee also met this morning. I was part of that meeting to just start to look at just fine-tuning some of the things. So by next week, the hope is we're going to be starting to move things forward. And we do have a number of COVID response bills that either the Senate has sent us or that we have been working on our side that will be among the first things that we vote on in this new way. We also have been hearing Brian and I, but and even more so, I think some of our colleagues in more rural parts of the state have been hearing from folks who are really, really struggling to access unemployment insurance benefits. They're not able to get through to the phone lines. They're not able to file claims. There's the dispensation of the federal stimulus bill hasn't been clear. And a lot of that is because we're still waiting for clarity and regulation and even just resources from the feds. That's been particularly true for people who are self-employed or small business owners. And we also just got a briefing today about some of the grants that were available through the Small Business Association as a result of being administered by the Small Business Association as a result of federal funding. And that money, it's already gone. And they're hoping for more, so more people applied. It was essentially first come, first serve, and it wasn't a huge, it was maybe $10 or $15 million, and it's all gone. And they're hoping for additional federal money to keep those programs going. So we just recognize that it's not working. I think both at the federal level and really even at the state level, we haven't been able to build out our capacity quickly enough. They are trying to contract, I think, with some outside help now, in addition to just redeploying people within state government. And then just today, the governor announced in his press conference that they are going to try to clear out every claim by, I think it's Saturday evening, but basically through this weekend. And then they are going to start cutting people advance checks at the state level, very similar to the federal stimulus checks that some people have started to get via direct deposit for those people who have filed uninsurance claims that haven't been resolved. So that was a real recognition that things aren't working and a commitment to make a big change there so that Vermonters aren't having to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for this to be further resolved. So they'd be basically making advances on unemployment claims if they can't get this resolved within the next 24 hours, which is good to see. But we know that there's a lot more that needs to happen. So that's unemployment. The governor also just is starting to outline some plans for how to reopen certain businesses in very limited ways. I haven't looked at the full guidelines on those, but they were just released today. So I think it includes some things like limited landscaping, realtors, certain guidelines for certain businesses that might be able to continue their work with more social distancing. And then in my committee, I serve on the House Judiciary Committee, and I've updated in these conversations in the past about a number of the things we're working on. And so I won't go into great detail here, but because basically I think we're at the point now where we're ready to vote some bills out of our committee, but the whole House needs to be ramped up and ready to vote on these bills. So these are things that really look at just processes that the courts have recommended they really need, things like remote notarization of certain kinds of documents, things like just creating more reasonable timelines around when cases get heard, revisiting bail, things like that. So we have kind of what we would in a normal year call almost like a miscellaneous judiciary bill, as well as a standalone bill about remote notarization of wills. And we're really just kind of waiting to be able to vote those out. We've heard from all of our witnesses and had most of our committee discussion on them. And then we are also waiting for the House Corrections Committee is working on a big justice reinvestment bill that came over from the Senate prior to COVID-19 that really looks at a lot of strategies to decrease the amount of time that people are incarcerated, especially on technical violations relating to various community supervision categories. And although not an immediate COVID response bill. I think a lot of us think that has particular relevance right now. And so that bill will, I think they're might have voted it out or getting ready to vote it out of their committee. And then it will probably come to the Judiciary Committee for a look at a handful of sections. That's what we're working on. I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. So for people watching who don't know, I'm Representative Brian Cina, the other state representative for Chittenden 6-4. It's me and Selena Colburn, who are the two state representatives for this district. I live in the old North End part of the district. Selena lives in the East District part of the district. And I serve on the healthcare committee in the House. I'm a clinical social worker outside of the legislature, so I'm placed on the healthcare committee. And in the healthcare committee, a lot of our work right now is just monitoring what's going on, getting reports on how our healthcare system has completely shifted focus to prepare for a surge. There have been hundreds of additional beds built around the state to handle a surge. Additional personal protective equipment is being stockpiled and gathered. Our ability to testing has broadened, and now there's testing being done in state. It's not just being shipped out of state. So what has happened during this time of social distancing is the people of Vermont have sacrificed their economic opportunities for public health, and it's allowed us to keep our death rate lower because we've limited the spread of the COVID-19 infection. Now that we have limited that infection and that the curve of infection is flattening out, the state is moving to the next phase, which is going to be slowly reopening the economy. What the governor says, he says, opening the spigot. He uses that analogy by quarter turns, because what we needed to do was buy time to have capacity of the healthcare system. If we had just let the infection spread through the population unchecked, we would have seen an exponential curve that would have surpassed the carrying capacity of our healthcare system. And once that happened, you would have people lined up in the hallways of the hospitals, unable to get the treatment they needed, and the death rate would have skyrocketed. And so to save the most vulnerable Vermonters who would have ended up in that position, we all had to sacrifice and be staying home and staying safe while the healthcare system expanded its capacity. Now, the healthcare system has done that. And as many of you may see in your lives, your routine care has changed. You're getting telemedicine now, or your dental checkups, or your physicals are being delayed. You're not getting surgeries you'd plan to have because the hospital's leaving extra room. Now that we have that capacity in place, we can slowly open the spigot and let people have less restrictions. But what may happen, people need to be prepared for, is we may see a continuation of infection or growth of the infection. But now, as that happens and people need help, there is space for them. And so they can get access. And not only that, but the state has worked to change rules and regulations so that all COVID, now my email is going to start making that sound, so let me shut it. So the state has also changed rules and regulations, which allows greater access to telemedicine. It is waiving cost-sharing requirements for COVID treatment. So a lot of the barriers for people getting the help they need if they get the infection have been lowered or eliminated. Now we can open the spigot up, let people go back to work little by little. And what's going to happen, most likely, is there will be some continued spread of the infection. As this happens, the state will carefully monitor the spread of that infection, and we may have to return to social distancing and greater restrictions in a series of waves over the next year, depending on what happens. The best case scenario is we find out that a lot of people had asymptomatic infection and that there's herd immunity, and that causes a slower spread of the infection. The worst case is we see a spike in cases over the next few weeks, and we have to return to social distancing to try to curb that growth of infection. In terms of the transition to what's next, the state is looking into antibody testing. There's a working group of experts looking at serologic antibody testing. And so the idea is, in addition to testing people who have symptoms of an illness that might be COVID-19, we can do broader testing of the population to determine who has immunity, who had an asymptomatic infection. And then that can better help us understand how this is spread through the population and our herd immunity. So that's something important to keep in mind. Another thing we're looking at is collecting race and ethnicity data to make sure there aren't disparities being intensified in the provision of healthcare. We already know that there's disparities in the way that people of color and people of certain social groups get healthcare treatment and get access. And we are trying to measure that more through this crisis because it will widen those cracks for people. That's something that we're seeing happening nationwide. Now, as we transition back, as we open back up the economy, some of the things the governor proposed today were allowing small crews for outside construction or trade jobs, single worker, low or no contact professional services, giving some guidance to retailers to allow additional operations like delivery and curbside services, and the state will outline safety requirements for these entities to ensure that they're operating with social distancing, hygiene and disinfection protocol. So the idea is letting certain people be able to go back to work with greater protection. And when I was listening to the press conference today, examples that were given were that perhaps we may get to a point where if there's a public gathering for entertainment, you could have a third of the capacity in a room that you used to have if things work well, because there's greater distance between people and greater cleaning and greater hygiene practices in that room, but that we will not see a return to what there was before anytime soon in terms of mass crowds of people gathering and getting close to each other because of the risk of infection. So we've built up, in summary of this part, we've built up the capacity of our healthcare system to handle a surge if it comes. We've done a great job of flattening the curve. And now we will open up strategically and carefully, guided by public health guidelines, the economy, so that some people can get back to work and some pieces of our life can return to, I hesitate to use the word normal because it's not going to be normal. It's going to be a new economy, a new way of doing business, but allowing business to start up again so that it can take some of that economic pressure off people. Something the state recognizes, and we're hearing a lot about in the healthcare committee, is the mental health impact of this crisis. It's going to be the second wave of casualties of the epidemic. We're starting to see evidence that there might be an increase in suicide rates, and overdoses and issues with substance abuse, and that's only going to intensify as we cut people off from social contact and we create economic stress, as there's financial stress on people. So we need to balance public health and economic stress. And that's what the state's going to try to do moving forward. I'm going to stop myself there because it's been about 10 minutes. Well, no, it's been like 7 minutes. And I'm going to turn to these questions. I'm going to say the question, maybe if I think it's my part, I'll answer it, and then I'll let Selena answer, and I'm going to tend to the waiting room because I see someone's trying to come in. So I see how many citizens have been reported for breaking social distancing rules. I am unaware of that information. Maybe I'll let Selena answer. I will say this, though, that I side with the people who don't think we should be surveilling each other and reporting to the government unless you think it's a major safety issue. Like if you think someone's putting people's lives majorly at risk, like if they're dumping medical waste or something, then yeah, maybe you need to report it. But I don't think we should be telling on people for jogging without a mask. Selena, do you want to comment on, can you see the questions?
Yep, I actually responded in the chat and said we had heard we've been talking a little bit about that in my committee, and I also listened to some similar conversations about this issue in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So we actually heard from a constitutional scholar, Jared Carter, who some of you may know at Vermont Law School, around just like how do we do this balancing of individual constitutional liberties against public health crisis. And so I think legislators are expressing a lot of concern about this question of, things like tip lines and how people are being reported. We've also talked a lot about the Agency of Transportation, and I think state troopers are like monitoring the borders some more they're not supposed to be really questioning people about entering the border in an intimidating way, but rather just tracking movement into and out of the state for public health data. But we're trying to get more information in our committee just about how that data is being used, how it's being stored over the long term. So I know that Burlington is actually one of the only municipalities that imposed civil penalties for people who break the stay safe order. And so the short answer is there definitely are some calls happening where police are coming and checking on people. I don't know those numbers for Burlington, but just around the state. But really the approach that people are supposed to be taking is education and outreach and not enforcement. And we've heard that from the Attorney General, who released some guidelines. We've heard that from the governor. But we're also hearing individual instances where that balance has felt to individual residents of the state not particularly well balanced. And so we are trying to dig into that in both judiciary committees in the legislature. So I don't have a hard and fast answer to your question, but just to say that we are trying to pay really close attention to that in those committees and keep bringing the Department of Public Safety in to answer questions about it and others.
So I see the next question has to do with masks. It looks like the question is, I heard the governor was going to require masks, but I haven't seen it posted anywhere. Is this in effect? And what I'm going to do is refer directly to an announcement from the governor about this. You might hear my email beep because it's in my email that around cloth face coverings, it's recommended that all Vermonters wear cloth face coverings when outside of the home. It is not a requirement when you're for the average Vermonter out in public, walking around on the street, that you have to have your face covered. It's recommended. And it's less about you and more about others. Because when you wear a face cloth covering your face, you're not protecting yourself from the virus, but you're blocking your own droplets and air from getting on other people. And it's about courtesy. So if you're staying far enough away and you don't have face covering, you pose a low risk. But if you're going to get closer to a person, it would be a courteous thing to cover your face. It's a recommendation. It's not a law. There's not a penalty for not doing it. As for within workplaces, additional guidance is coming. And so we're going to be hearing that as the spigot is open, we're going to be hearing some guidance about what is expected in various establishments. And I think you're going to see, depending on the nature of an establishment, probably different expectations around protection. So the details are coming on that from the governor's office. They haven't laid it out yet, but I hope that answers the question for now. So someone calling the hotline or making a report about someone with a mask, without a mask, walking around outside is not really in line. It would be more like if you go to a supermarket and you see somebody doing something dangerous, that would be more of a public health concern. And I would suggest people speak with the management at a supermarket before calling the state. It's just common courtesy. I'm going to look at I don't know if you want to add to that, Selena, but I felt like that was a healthcare question.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to say that wouldn't be redundant to that.
Do you want to answer the next question?
Sure. So I do think the Government Operations Committee has been looking a little bit at elections issues. We also have a Secretary of State who is really proactive and continues to update us as legislators. So we have a lot in place that makes it possible for people to vote by mail. We have, online registration now. We have same-day voter registration. And we have a very long, healthy period for absentee ballot voting. The latest guidance that I saw from Secretary Kondo said that they're going to be looking at what needs to happen in August and November to expand and encourage access to absentee ballots. And I do think it's a good idea to think about, like, do we just want to get to the point where we just mail everyone a ballot? And I don't know if that would require legislation or if, but I will look into that and try to report back to folks. It does sound like, and it's probably a constitutional issue, that there is going to have to be some way that in-person polls are open in August and November. But I think there is a lot. We already see like huge numbers of absentee ballots in Vermont, and they've been increasing every election cycle in recent years. And but I think there's things we could do to expand access to that. But I don't think we can fully. I think my understanding from the Secretary of State is that we can't like fully replace in-person voting with that. But I think the idea of just automatically mailing a ballot to everyone is a really interesting and good one.
The next series of comments and questions are around public health. There's some statements around how public health is. This is the opinion of an attendee. One of our attendees is saying that they're concerned about the lack of how does the state, knowing that its education around public health is working, and expressing concern about how protecting others is important, and that public health, the opinion of the person is, they said, quote, public health is more important than personal freedom, quote. And what's the point of the state police having a report process? My understanding from listening to the governor speak and his people speak is that the reporting process isn't about individual behavior in a public place. It's more about people violating the order in business. Like, there were reports of businesses operating outside of this order. And that's really where the reporting process came in, is that there were people who were still continuing to run a business and make money in a risky way against the public health order. And so that was really the purpose of that hotline. I think that's why you would call law enforcement. There are people who are also using it to call and complain about people just walking around without masks. But once again, there's no order saying you must wear a mask walking around in public. I see that a follow-up to this is college kids partying in an unsafe manner. I think you could call your local law enforcement and report a party. Burlington has a party noise ordinance. You can report a party to begin with, and then the police could decide in that situation how they handle educating people about public health, in addition to the noise disruption that's happening. But that you wouldn't call the state hotline and say, I would like to let you know that a bunch of kids had a party. I think that's not real. You could, but I just don't know if you're going to get the outcome you wish. I think the issue is, once again, who do you report violations to, local law enforcement or state? Law enforcement. I see the person's commenting follow-up that they're specifying, like, if people are outside together in a group. And we did hear the city of Burlington present some information about this, that the city council was talking about how to enforce this. And I don't know if, Selena, if you have more detail about I don't know if any ordinance was passed or how they would go about doing that. But the city did say that they were going to intervene with problem offenders. So not just a random group of people walking, but there's people who are regularly congregating in public in large groups, and it's been concerning people. So I know that the city of Burlington, on a statewide level, I honestly haven't heard about this problem. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it seems to be a Burlington issue where you have a denser population. A lot of people are living separated from each other. So in towns all around Vermont, you're not hearing complaints about large congregations of people. Socially, you're hearing about it from a business perspective, like people carrying out construction that they aren't supposed to carry out, or people running a business, selling a product that's not considered an essential service. I just want to say one more thing about this issue, and then I don't know if you want to add, Selena. I'm looking at your body language, and I can't tell if you want to speak or not. But do you want to add to it, or?
I'll add briefly when you're done.
Okay. The last thing I'll say is, and this is my position. I know it's the position of some other groups like the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm a member, as well as Cina, and we're putting out the electeds nationwide are putting out a statement where we believe that public health policy and the follow up here up to this social distancing, the contact tracing is going to be important, and more social distancing, and there's going to be public health practices that have to go on for a while to eradicate this virus. But we have to be careful we do not cross the line of civil liberties, and that in some countries they are. In some places they're tracking people on their cell phones without their consent. They're using facial recognition. The idea that you're going to have to maybe carry around some kind of certificate to enter places. We really need to vet these ideas before we go down that path, because we have to be careful that our fear of a virus doesn't make us give up our freedom in the wrong way. And that's just my opinion, that I think it's a balance between public safety and personal freedom. And we have to be careful that we respect civil liberties in that context. And that's just how I would end my response.
Yeah, I would just say, I reiterate, Burlington did create civil penalties for folks who are, and I think they're the only jurisdiction in the state actually that did that. So there's like basically a fine, you can get a citation and a fine if you're not observing the executive order. And then I think they have also done a lot of work around shutting down parts of public spaces, especially parks where people were clearly not absorbing the orders. So things like basketball courts and stuff like that, where it was really clear that, there were like large pickup games were starting to happen. And then they've done a lot of signing around streets, different streets, some of the complete streets around social distancing norms. So they're using really a combination of education and enforcement. I know in our district too, there are foot patrols that police do that are, I think, funded by the university around quality of life issues. So interrupting, trying to stop a party before it starts, or educate people on noise violations, and also intercept problem situations before residents have to call the police and ask for assistance. And I believe I had heard early on that the police were deploying some of those same kinds of tactics around social distancing norms and the executive order, but I don't know a ton of details on that. So I think they're using a combination of enforcement and education, and hopefully some proactive community policing. I know that they're doing that's equitable.
Yeah, I know that they are doing that, because the other day I was walking with a friend of mine who's also a person who doesn't identify as white, and the police stopped us 1 block from my house, and we both had face coverings, and they said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And so I was sort of like, "What do you mean? What am I doing here?" And then he said, "What are you guys up to?" And I said, "We're walking." And then he started asking me where or something. And I took my mask down to talk. And then he recognized me and quickly was like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And so I think they are checking in with people. Just speaking to the equitable piece though, I wonder if everyone's getting asked equally, because that's often a problem. But there was a comment in here. I don't see another question. I see lots of comments. Back to one of our constituents over from co-housing. One of our constituents said something about changing the world, and another person said something about we can't go back to normal, or why would we want to go back to normal? And I thought maybe we could speak a little bit about that in this crisis, what is happening is we are seeing the disparities and problems in our society exposed bare, that the cracks in our social safety net and the injustice that's baked into our society is exposed. It's very out in the open now. And a lot of people are feeling the pain that some others always feel. And so it's an opportunity to reflect on what have we been doing right, and what have we been doing wrong? And moving forward, Celine, I agree on this. I don't want to speak for you, but I think I can say we see this as a chance to learn and to move forward in a better direction. It's not about trying to restore the status quo. It's about trying to actually move to something better. And an example I'll give is around homelessness. That on the healthcare committee, I say a lot that housing is healthcare, because having stable housing affects your healthcare outcomes in such a strong way. And right now, the city of Burlington has people who are homeless living in campers at North Beach. Other people are living in hotels with vouchers. There's a hotel set up for COVID positive people who are homeless to stay and get better. So in this crisis, we've essentially stepped up and provided housing to almost everyone. I have seen some people sleeping out on the street still, walking around at night. Saw someone sleeping the other day. But generally, people are being provided a safe and secure housing right now. What's going to happen when the crisis ends? And I think there's an opportunity here for us to invest moving forward in universal housing and programs like Pathways Vermont to find people permanent housing. So one way, we cannot return to normal is we could potentially, if we're wise moving forward from this, build the system we need to end homelessness. And so that's one example of how we might move forward in a positive way. I don't know if you have an example that you'd like to give next.
I can. I think I've shared this example maybe in the past in an update with some people who are on this call, but knowing that it's going out to Channel 17, I'll share it again because it's really pretty striking. So similarly, I apologize for this funky lighting coming in and out of my backlighting, coming in and out of my windows. In our criminal justice system, we have been, over the past year, we commissioned a study by an outside consultant with a number of stakeholders and legislators that we call the Justice Reinvestment Study. And we have legislation I mentioned that's starting to move forward, enacting some of those recommendations. And really what the study did was looked at all of these different categories of community supervision in particular, and all of the ways that people are being reincarcerated for technical violations, for lack of approved housing, for all kinds of minor details. And they laid out a 5-year plan to reduce our incarcerated population in the state by 200 people for an investment of $1.5 million. In the past month to month and a half, state's attorneys, judges, defense attorneys, and other legal advocates have reduced the incarcerated population in Vermont by about 250 people. By reviewing bail, by reviewing sentences, by DOC has been a big, Department of Corrections has been a big partner in this, releasing people in their custody. No new legislation was required to do that. No significant financial investments that I'm aware of were required to do that. And, within 4 to 6 weeks, we achieved a really, really significant, and all of these people who were released were carefully screened around issues of public safety and the kind of danger that they would pose to the community. Nobody who there was any sense that they would pose a danger to the community was released, and those efforts continue. There's a bunch more pending cases for review. There's people pushing for greater parameters around medical furlough. And it's another really strong example of here we are in this crisis and we're suddenly able to act quickly to make major changes to a system that I think so many people acknowledge is not working, it's not cost effective, and it's not actually making us safer. So that's a very similar example. I think where all of a sudden we were okay, let's make a really big change here. And I continue to think it's so dramatic to contrast that against sort of the legislature's plan for how to do that, which was this very slow, resource intensive, and we're still going to implement those things. So there'll be an even greater net gain, hopefully. But I'm just really hopeful that we don't go back to normal when we look at our criminal justice system and who really needs to be in an incarcerative setting.
Selena, there's some follow-up questions. I'll read them and maybe you could respond. Like one was around, will releasing prisoners allow other prisoners to come home from out of state?
Well, I think the out-of-state population is like 150. So I've been wondering what the answer to that question is too. And, when you try to talk to DOC and so DOC is Department of Corrections. When you try to talk to corrections and others about that, like if we could just take these steps to reduce these numbers, they always talk about it being not necessarily apples to oranges. But I think that's going to be a really good and important question to push on the other side of this crisis when we've seen this, could end up being like 300. The prison population in state could be reduced by 300 people. So, really good question. And I and Brian have been legislators who have consistently opposed the use of out of state prisons to house Vermonters. And then I'm just trying to scan through and see, are there other?
The next question.
Did all of the people who were released have stable housing? I am not sure about the answer to that. And I think reasonable advocates, that's a really controversial provision, right? Is someone safer and better off in prison, which has all kinds of collateral consequences and increased risk of recidivism, than being sort of outside and not having stable or approved housing. I think there's still like a fair amount of screening for housing that's happening in those releases, but I know there's some advocates who are like, look, honestly, people at this point, especially now that we've seen these like major infection rates in some of the facilities, should be allowed to be at risk for housing rather than be like at risk of having a death sentence for like a, nonviolent felony or even misdemeanor. It's a really good question, though. It's tricky. It's been one of the trickiest things about reducing those numbers.
So we have a couple of minutes left. I'm curious if anyone else has questions about anything we've talked about or anything else. I was planning to be on the call until 6. I'm assuming that's what people thought it would be about. I see. So Grant wants to know about AI. I think that's what that is. You're not just saying I. You're saying AI. I'm assuming it's AI since you're asking. Okay, yes. Well, I'll say something about that topic. AI meaning artificial intelligence. That before this crisis struck, Vermont had been the first state in the country to have an artificial intelligence task force, and I was able to serve on that task force as a social worker. And we issued a report. And if I don't have the link available, but I'm happy to provide it if someone wants to email my legislative email, or if you remind me before this is over, I'll try to find it. But or you can actually Google Vermont Artificial Intelligence Task Force report, and it'll actually come right up. But we issued a report making recommendations that the state take action to start using AI. And there wasn't much traction on those recommendations happening before this. We hit this crisis. That in the House, the Energy and Technology Committee was busy working on the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is going to, we may transition to something about that in a minute based on what I'm seeing in the chat. And so they didn't have much time to do AI stuff. And I had been talking with Senate Government Operations Committee members about maybe them finding a way to implement some of those recommendations. then the crisis hit, and now we're being told that the priority are the state money bills, and then other COVID-19 related issues, and then we may be able to get a few other things through. So I don't have high hopes that we're going to see action in this session about AI. However, it doesn't mean that the effort is over, and I'm hoping in the next legislative session, I keep saying section, in the next legislative session that the legislature will look at those recommendations and consider them again. And if I'm reelected, and I do plan to run for reelection, I will continue to advocate for the state to be an early actor on AI. I'm also planning to participate in an international, it's going to be Zoom based for now, but it's an international, I don't know what the word is. It's not really a conference. It's more like a think tank of people who do AI policy in Europe and in the United States. And I'm going to participate with them over the summer in hopes of talking about AI policy from the local to global level. Because one of the things we realized in the task force was that when it comes to AI, there's certain things we can do on the local and state level, but a lot of AI policy is going to come down to international collaboration and international policy. And so I'm excited to take part in that this summer, because I think what will come out of that, I'll come out with a richer knowledge of what's going on internationally. And also you'll have a Vermonter contributing to that discussion internationally. So that's my update on AI. I'm sorry that I can't report that Vermont's going to be the first state to have an AI commission, or that we're going to be investing in some of the recommendations, such as local installations of technology, so that all or many functions of government could be broadcast on the web to everyone using AI. We may find that from this remote work environment, that it actually shows people the power that technology has to open up our democracy. And there is a role for AI in making that function smoothly and equitably. So I'll stop myself there. The next question is around climate legislation, and I'll let Selena start us off on that one.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one of the things that's been, clearly what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, both locally and internationally, is really intense and heartbreaking. And I think we're right to kind of stop in our tracks and respond to it. But it's really hard to also see all the other legislation that was stopped in its tracks, at least for now. And climate legislation is really high on that list. It felt like we, both as outside advocates and as legislators in the building, had done a lot of work to pull together to try to get some meaningful steps underway, especially after feeling like last year was a really disappointing year on climate issues in the legislature. And so the Climate Solutions Caucus of the legislature is a large caucus with almost 90 senators and legislators. Brian and I are both members, active members. And so we had a platform that we were seeing pretty significant progress on, with 4 banner bills and a lot of other smaller provisions that we were trying to work through all of our committees. And all of those bills none of those bills are moving forward right now. I think one of the things we're trying to understand about the legislature is April is for sure COVID-19 response bills. We may start to see some additional bills move forward. And then what we're hearing is, we're likely to keep working late May, early June, and then maybe come back even in the fall some. And that may be another window of opportunity to pass some legislation. There's a bill that I have sponsored a couple different versions of, and Brian has been a co-sponsor of, called the Global Warming Solutions Act, that would create kind of a framework for us moving forward around climate planning and accountability. And I have heard even pretty recently that remains a strong priority for the Speaker of the House. I think the challenge is it does have an appropriation attached to it, and anything that is going to require resources, it's like we're back to ground zero on that. So we are meeting the Climate Solutions Caucus. I'm just actually about to send out a notice to people. We're going to try to meet next week and more regularly. I think there's a lot, actually, like a lot that we're learning in this moment of crisis about how quickly we can act on something when we really perceive it to be an emergency. And so, I think we're trying to walk a very fine line between learning from that and taking those lessons forward in the climate movement, and then also understanding that we do need to be in this immediate response mode to what's happening in public health, and just like the decimation of our state and national economy right now. So it is a really tricky line, but we're not giving up, and we're continuing to think about strategizing and how we keep as much moving forward as humanly possible without compromising our COVID-19 efforts.
So what I would just add to that is that, in the strategy moving forward, the first things we're going to be doing are going to be some money bills. Those are the bills essential to the functioning of the state, because the transportation bill, the infrastructure capital bill, it's called, the state budget, the education funding, tax bills. These money bills are essential for the functioning of government. And I think an opportunity where we will see to maybe influence policy on climate change will be the transportation bill, because it's a bill where it has to pass, and it involves one of the greatest contributors to carbon emissions. So hopefully in the transportation bill, we can get some gains. I see someone posted promote car sharing to reduce carbon emissions in electric cars. And I think that the T-bill, the transportation bill, is a place where you may see something happen. In terms of recovery, the economic recovery, one of the things that we're seeing from this crisis is just how extractive our economy is. Our economy is built to extract resources from the earth and to extract labor from humans. And it exploits people and exploits our planet. And that's very much laid bare right now. And in moving forward in our recovery, it's an opportunity to look at how can we shift from being an extractive economy to a regenerative economy, where we take care of people, where we regenerate human resources, where we protect the environment and our ecosystems. And so I'm hoping that in the discussion moving forward, once we get through the immediate stabilization, that there's an opportunity to do improvement. I just think of the analogy. I'm a part-time crisis clinician. That when you're intervening in a mental health crisis, the first thing you do is you try to stop everything and assess what is going on for a person and what is missing, and then you help them get the services they need to stabilize, and then from those services you have long-term care. And so right now, I feel like, we're still in the triage phase. Like, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we assess what we need to do? And then there's going to be emergency actions like unemployment and building up our surge capacity. And that to me is sort of like the parallel would be someone going to a hospital for a few days. But when someone leaves the hospital is actually when the real work begins on rebuilding your life, when you have a mental health crisis. And so in this crisis, I think that once things are stabilized, we're going to have to shift focus to like, okay, how do we rebuild the healthcare system after this? Because it will be so transformed. It's already been transformed to cope with this crisis. So I guess just, my bringing it back to climate change is that when we look at moving forward with our economy, we're going to have opportunities to think about how we can have a regenerative economy. And this would mean an economy that takes into impact the full potential harm of our economy on our climate. I see a question. Are we going to start looking at a state banking system? So that I just have to smile at that question, because that has been sort of a passion of mine. And it was pretty clear that like people were not ready for that in the past few years. I don't know if I don't feel confident saying people are ready for that yet. I don't know if you feel differently, Selena, but I think that when we see bailouts for banks, while working people are saddled with debt, it really shows people how unfair, the system has been rigged, that we are all held in bondage to these banks. And if you look at the crisis, the economic crisis right now, if we want to suspend rent, well, why do people have to pay rent to begin with? Well, a lot of landlords, whether they're small landlords or rich landlords, are paying mortgages. And so they're held in debt to these banks. Student loans, you're held in debt to banks. Credit cards, you're held in debt to banks. So at the core of a lot of our inequity comes this financial bondage to a private banking system that continues to enrich stockholders. And every time there's a problem, who do we bail out? So perhaps from this crisis, people will see the role that private banking plays in perpetuating inequity. And if that's the case, perhaps we can start looking at a public banking system seriously. That's my answer to that. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I won't add to that because we're getting close to time, but so maybe we could just take, if there's any question from someone who hasn't had a chance, or comment from anyone who hasn't had a chance to weigh in yet, maybe we could take just one more question and then wrap up, if that feels okay to people. And if there's no more, if there's no more questions or comments that's from folks, that's fine too, but I have to make my kids dinner pretty soon. My third job.
I need to get out of this chair. Like, my back hurts. I'm sure everyone's going through this now who does any kind of teleworking. It doesn't look like there's more questions, and it is 6:07, and we've been meeting about an hour. We started a little late. So I know there's other issues affecting people's lives out there that we didn't talk about today, but we do plan on doing these fairly regularly. I don't think every week is realistic. I will give a little heads up that there's going to be a statewide House Progressive Caucus town meeting coming up. It is not scheduled yet. We will keep you posted on Front Porch Forum, but that'll be an opportunity from hear from the 7 elected progressives in the House in a Zoom call. So that'll be coming up, and I think we will be planning, Cina and I will be planning, maybe perhaps with Representative Gonzalez, another one of these soon. So I'll stop speaking there and just say thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. And please email us with your questions. We know it's rough right now, and we'll do everything we can to help you within our power. Just email us, and I'll hand it off to Cina to wrap it up.
Nope, that's it. That's great. I know it's like these groups have tended to be small shifting groups, but it's so nice to see constituents who I know are, just down the street from me, who I don't get to see in person, and to just hear how things are going for you and hear your questions. And we really appreciate your time and your feedback.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.